Today is week number 8. And in week number 8, we're about to wrap things up. We are going to be talking about the second half of Matthew 24, Jesus' Olivet Discourse. And I think that at the end, we will leave it with a cliffhanger. We'll see. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to happen. Depends on how long things go. But just as a little recap, Matthew 24 is an entire chapter devoted to what's called the Olivet Discourse. And the setup is this. In the previous 3 chapters, Matthew 21, 22, and 23, Jesus is talking about against the current religious establishment. He says, "Woe to you, Pharisees and teachers of the law, your time is coming." And then he curses a fig tree and says, "May you never produce fruit again." And then he tells a parable in which the kingdom is taken from someone and given to someone else. And he was saying that to the Pharisees. And the Pharisees, it says in Scripture, they understood what he was talking about. They knew that he was talking about them. So Jesus is saying, your time's a coming. Then they go up to the temple, and his disciple says, "Oh man, look at this, Jesus. Look how beautiful these buildings are." And Jesus says, "I tell you that not one stone will be left on top of another. Everything will be knocked down." And that is where this conversation in Matthew 24 starts. All right, so here's what it started with like this. Jesus left the temple and was going away. And his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be one left. One stone upon another will not be thrown down." And as he sat on the Mount of Olives, which is on the other side of the temple, you can see the temple from the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. So it's just the disciples and Jesus. And they asked him, "So tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" We pointed out last time that question is a compound question. It actually has 3 different elements to it. They're asking, when will these things be, which seems to be referring clearly to the destruction of the temple. What will be the sign of your coming, and what will be the end of the age? And therefore, Jesus then answers that. Now last time we read about wars. Jesus said, okay, before these things happen, you're going to have a number of signs. There are going to be earthquakes. There are going to be wars. There are going to be rumors of wars. And I asked you guys, do you think that this should be seen from a preterist point of view, meaning it already happened in the first century, or a futurist point of view, meaning it's going to happen in the future? And I think that by the end of the day, I think it would be fair to say that most of you could agree that it could be seen from a preterist point of view. It could be that those earthquakes and famines happened in the first century. It could be that the rumors of wars happened in the first century. Those things could have happened then. But now the futurist this is where if you're a futurist, you get excited because you're like, I know what's coming up. And here is what's coming up. So we're going to continue Jesus' conversation, and we're going to see, is there any possible way in which this could have actually already occurred? So that's why I wrote, good luck, preterists. Have fun with this one. How would you explain that this happened in the lifetime of the disciples? Jesus says, "For as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken." Now, if you're a preterist, you might have a problem. Do you see it? Is there any preterist who would like to say, "Oh, I know how that happened in the first century"? Now I've talked to several of you, so I know you're kind of leaning preterist, but you're like, I'm not answering that question at all. And if you're a futurist, you kind of feel like vindicated a little bit here. Like, this is the future, guys. This didn't happen in the first century. Well, any comments before we unpack it?
Well,
Any suspicions?
What happened then, it can be happening at a later date as well.
Oh, so you're going to ride the fence. You're going to say both.
Yeah.
I see what you're doing there. Dave?
That sounds fair, though. That sounds fair.
That sounds fair? Okay. Dave?
Maybe not that early, but I know, I think, wasn't it in the 1800s, there was a documented where, like, it said, like, all the stars were falling from the sky in like the 1800s or something like that. And, it's something interesting to look at. It's pretty well documented.
I know that in
Uh,
1830 is known as the year without a summer because there was a volcano in Indonesia that basically blanketed the atmosphere for over 12 months and crops went bad throughout the world. I know that.
So there's a
Never
few
heard of the
things
stars falling.
from then until
Yeah.
not too long ago that I've heard some arguments for.
All right.
What year was that volcano? Just out of curiosity.
I think it was 1831. Or it could have been 1813. I might be transposing those.
Okay.
But it was a volcano in Indonesia. And even in North America, the crops went bad that year.
That was Krakatoa, wasn't it?
Yes, that one.
Yeah.
That one. Anyways, so right now, if you are a futurist, you should be feeling pretty good. But I've got some really, really bad news for you if you're a futurist. And that would be the verse that comes about 3 verses later. So here I wrote, good luck, preterist. And here is how Jesus ends his speech. And here's where we're going to be ending today. Jesus ends it this way, just a few verses later. He says, from the fig tree learn its lesson as soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves. You know that the summer is near. So also, when you see these things, and remember, he's talking privately to his disciples, you know that he is near at the very gates. And truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will not pass away. He doubles down, like heaven and earth will pass away, but what I say is going to come to pass. And Jesus right there said that all these things will happen in this generation. So now, if you're a futurist, you're squirming a little bit. Because you're like, oh, it looked good a few verses ago, but now it's like, this generation. Huh. The expression this generation is used 14 times in the gospel, and guess what it means? This generation. So now you've got a problem. And what you really have here is one of the most difficult passages in the New Testament to interpret. Because if you're a preterist, you somehow got to figure out how that happened in the first century. And if you're a futurist, you got to figure out how that didn't happen in the first century. Both of them are a conundrum. So let's take a look at how I think you could solve it. Not I think. You guys know R.C. Sproul? Yes. R.C. Sproul. I read his book. That's all I did. I'm cheating here. I'm not that smart. I just read. So here is what we're going to do. We are going to start with, I got lost. We're going to start with this. So here Jesus is talking about the coming of the Son of Man. He also talks about that in verse 30. So I'm going to postpone that discussion to verse 30. Instead, I'm going to focus on 29 to start with. We're going to unpack that. So after tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven. So here's what I'm going to suggest to you. I call this class exegetical eschatology because I insist, and I think it is right, that we interpret Scripture based upon Scripture. You use Scripture as the key to interpret Scripture. Not your imagination or what you think it says, but you use Scripture. And so let's ask the question, is Jesus referring to anything in Scripture when he says these things in verse 29? And the answer is yes. He is actually quoting Isaiah, almost verbatim. So let's go back to Isaiah and see what Jesus is quoting. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Seems like a good approach. Here's Isaiah 13:10. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. Exactly what Jesus said in Matthew 24. Isaiah 34. All the stars of the sky will dissolve, and the heavens rolled up like a scroll. All the starry host will fall. So the stars will fall, the sun will not give its light, the moon will be darkened. Exactly the things that Jesus is referring to. So let's ask this question. When Scripture uses language like this, in the Old Testament, for example, what is it actually referring to? What is it talking about? So let's take a look at the context. And that is another principle for how we interpret the Bible. You look at the context. And so we're going to look at the context. Here's Isaiah 13. Isaiah 13 is an oracle of the oracle of Babylon, which Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw. In other words, this is a judgment against Babylon. At the time of Isaiah, Babylon was the world power, and Isaiah is prophesying that Babylon will fall. If you recall, there were 4 empires in the Middle East that Isaiah and Daniel all talk about. The Babylonians were taken over by the Persians and Medes. We're taken over by the Greeks. We're taken over by the Romans. We're at the first one here. Here's what Isaiah says. See, the day of the Lord is coming, a cruel day with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land desolate and destroy the sinners within it. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light, The rising sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. I will punish the world for its evil, the wicked for their sins. I will put an end to the arrogance of the haughty, and will humble the pride of the ruthless. I will make people scarcer than pure gold, more rare than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will shake from its place, and the wrath of the Lord Almighty in the day of his burning anger. Behold, I am stirring the Medes against them. The Medes are the Persians. This is an oracle in which Isaiah is, on behalf of God, passing judgment on Babylon. He's saying, Babylon, you are going to get yours, and you are about to collapse. And what happened? Babylon collapsed. And who did they collapse by? The Medes. However, let me ask you this question. In those days when Babylon fell to the Medes, did the stars actually fall from the sky? No. Was the sun actually darkened or the moon actually darkened? No. But this is the language that Isaiah is using to describe God's judgment on Babylon. So what you are seeing here is Old Testament language of judgment. When a nation is judged, this is what the Old Testament looks like. And Jesus is quoting this, or paraphrasing this, in his judgment of Jerusalem. He's saying, Jerusalem, that which happened to Babylon is about to happen to you. And it's not literal, it's hyperbolic, figurative language, but it's describing a very bad day for a nation.
Was the sun the king of Babylon?
I don't think so. I think he's just talking about something. Because he then has the moon and the stars and all those kinds
Well,
of
it
things.
could have been his princes and the people he had ruling with him.
Could be. If you want to take it metaphorically, it could be. It can be. It is metaphor. This is not uncommon. This is everywhere. Here's Ezekiel. This is an oracle against Egypt. Different one. And it says, this is what the sovereign Lord says. With a great throng of people I will cast my net over you, and they will haul you up in a net. I will throw the land and hurl you to the open field. I will let the birds of the sky settle on you, and all the animals of the wild gorge themselves on you. I will spread your flesh on the mountains and fill the valleys with your remains. I will drench the land with your flowing blood and the way of the mountains, and the ravines will be filled with your flesh. Kind of sounds like Revelation, where the blood is up to the girdles of the horses. And then it says, when I snuff you out, I will cover the heavens and darken the stars. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon will not give its light. All the shining lights in the heavens will be darkened over you. I will bring darkness over your land, declares the sovereign Lord. This is an oracle against Egypt. You see the language again. This is a language of judgment. This did not literally happen. This is how the Bible expresses it's going to be bad for you. I am judging you. So, when you come back to this, and you look at this, the tribulation of those days, a preterist would tell you this. He's talking about the fall of Jerusalem. Because at the time when Jesus was saying this, the temple was the center of religious life. The priests had the power and authority. And Jesus was saying to them, it is coming to an end for you guys. And Jesus is employing the same language the Old Testament used to talk about God's judgment. So that is what the preterist would say those things mean. The futurist would say, that's probably not what it means. Here's how Lindsay's a futurist. And he, for example, thinks that the word star, as previously noted, can equally mean either an asteroid or a meteor. It's just a heavenly object back then. They didn't distinguish, depending on the context. But once again, the Apocalypse Code, which is his way of reading Revelation, helps us understand. I believe that the Apostle John was seeking to describe a phenomenon he had never seen and couldn't understand. I believe he witnessed a first all-out nuclear exchange between warring nations. One intercontinental ballistic missile with multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicles can deliver 12 thermonuclear warheads, and he's going on about what these things can mean and say, if this happens, the sun will be darkened. And we're going to have a big dust up, and you won't be able to see that. My contention is, okay, maybe. But I believe that to be faithful to Scripture, we ought to use Scripture to interpret Scripture. That's my contention. So I would just ask Hal Lindsay, well, where'd you get that? And his answer is, my imagination. That's it. Anything, speak up and let me know if I'm wrong about this. Is it not just his imagination? On the other hand, the preterist will say, where do I get that? Isaiah, Ezekiel, Nahum, Zechariah. That's the way the Old Testament speaks. And that is why I believe that the preterist way of handling this is the most biblically sound. Could there be a future in which this happens? Of course there could be. But biblically, I can't demonstrate that. All right, so now let's talk about the coming of the Son of Man. So here it's like, okay, where's the preterist going to say that the coming of the Son of Man came on the clouds? So let's go take a look at verse 30, because verse 30 says the same thing. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. All right. We've addressed this one already. I remember talking, and Sally was going. Sorry, Sally. Got your face at the time. Could this be future? Of course. I mean, I can't say or tell you that, oh, that's not going to happen in the future. I don't. But let's answer this question. Could there's any way in which that could have happened in the first century? That's a pretty tough task, isn't it? To say that that happened in the first century.
But it's part of the same conversation, right?
It's part of the same conversation.
Is that true?
Yeah.
We're just.
This is verse 30, and in verse 32, Jesus says, I swear to you that all these things will happen to this generation, or in this generation. So yeah. So the question now becomes, okay, in what sense did that happen in the first century? And the answer is actually easier than you think it is. Because Jesus himself said plainly that this happened in the first century, 2 chapters later. You guys like he did? He did. First of all, let's talk about coming on the clouds of heaven. This is also an Old Testament expression. We should use Scripture to interpret Scripture. So look at Scripture and look at where Scripture uses imagery of coming on the clouds of heaven. So let's go back to the Old Testament again. That's not Old Testament. There's the Old Testament. Isaiah. Behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and is about to come to Egypt. The idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence, and the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. Not literal. Agreed? God did not ride a cloud into Egypt. What's it talking about? It's talking about judgment. I'm going to judge Egypt. Nahum. This is the first time, if you've been a Christian for 50 years, this might be the first time in any class or church that anyone's ever quoted Nahum to you. But here you go. This is a red letter day. Nahum. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and the Lord will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. In a whirlwind and storm is his way, and clouds are the dust beneath his feet. So they had this image in the Old Testament that when God came in judgment, he came riding on a cloud. But of course, in Matthew 24, the verse we just read, Jesus is not quoting Nahum or Isaiah, he's quoting Daniel. He's very clearly quoting Daniel. Here's what Daniel says in Daniel 7:43. Just as a recap, this is verse 13. In verses 1 through 12, he talks about a sea coming out of the ocean, Babylon. Another sea coming out of the ocean. A monster coming out of a beast coming out of the sea is Babylon. Then another one, the Persians and Medes. Then the third one, the Greeks. Then the fourth one, the Romans. And then he says, and then, in my vision that night I looked, and there before me was one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led to him into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All the nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. And that last sentence is contrasted to the first 4 kingdoms that were destroyed. This one is not going to be destroyed. Now take a look at this. What is happening here? We have a Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. And he's coming where? He approached the Ancient of Days. And he was led into his presence. And the Ancient of Days gave him a few things. He gave him glory, power, and authority. I like to use this slide when it comes to this one. You guys ever watched that movie?
I love it.
What was the word that the guy kept using?
Inconceivable.
Inconceivable. I don't think it means what you think it means. Same thing with coming with the clouds of heaven. You have to, guys, use Scripture to interpret Scripture. You can't decide in your own head what it means. You have to look at Scripture to decide what Scripture is talking about. So here is Matthew 26, 2 chapters later. Jesus is at his trial. He's before the high priest. The high priest is getting frustrated with him. And he said, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But Jesus remained silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so. But I tell you, Mr. High Priest, that from now on, you, Mr. High Priest, will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." So I have a simple question. According to Jesus, when did this happen? That you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Jesus is saying it very plainly right there. Jesus isn't saying that in the future you will see this. Oh, by the way, that's why I showed you that.
And
How the
so we
Bible
have to
sheet.
interpret that last little bit as coming in judgment, like with the language. We have to just, in my mind,
That's
we
what-
have to say it.
That's what I'm getting. Yes.
Well,
You-
isn't
you're
that
right.
where, Stephen, when he was stoned, they saw Christ seated at the right hand?
Standing. Yeah. Right hand of the Father. Correct. That's exactly it. Jesus received the kingdom. I pointed out to you guys last time, if you weren't here, this is just a mind-blowing thing. My NIV Bible actually says, "But I say to you, in the future you will see the Son of Man." Were you guys here when I showed you that? Which is why I say beware of the NIV, because the NIV mistranslate things on purpose. They really do. This is the Greek. "I say to you from now on." It says now. Acti means now. Doesn't mean the future at all. But they don't like the fact that Jesus said that from now on you will see it. This is ESV. From now on you will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. So what it is, Stephen, is exactly that. This is judgment once again. So Jesus is looking at the high priest. The high priest has the power. The high priest has the authority. The temple is the place. That's where the glory is. And Jesus is saying, "I got bad news for you. You know that Son of Man from Daniel that is brought into the presence of God and is given authority and power? I'm that one. And your time is coming to an end. And I say to you that in this generation, that's what's going to happen." And Jesus was right. Within that generation, the temple gone, the priests gone, the Pharisees gone, the sacrifice is gone. It was judged. It was laid bare. And Christ was the one who received the authority and the kingdom that would have no end. That's what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about that. Now, if you are a staunch, stubborn futurist, and I appreciate you for being staunch, you still could say that that might be referring to the future. However, according to Jesus, it doesn't. Jesus is saying it happened now. So you're going to have to disagree with Jesus. And you can take it up with him. Yes, Amanda?
So, the verb tense is different. He's seated and coming. So, like, he's perpetually coming. He is already seated, but is he coming now and still coming?
Well, I think that's the point, that the word coming on the clouds of heaven means that he now has the authority to judge. From now on, he is the one who judges. He is the one who has the power. He's the one who has authority. So it's a continuous action. Although I couldn't go back to the Hebrew and Daniel and analyze that for you. I do not know enough.
But this morning we're dealing just with this chapter, right? Just this,
Yeah.
like you're not saying futurists, like, don't look to the future.
I'm talking, no, I'm talking about
but
this
you're
chapter.
addressing this
And that's why we
chapter.
have session 9 next week, which was the conclusion.
So next week.
Yes, Amanda?
One other comment just about Isaiah 19 and 7. So you say,
Oh, I hate questions that say you say, but go ahead.
well, you said.
Yeah.
And in the notes that did God literally rise clouds to Egypt to show up in person? Of course not. But how do you know? You were not there.
That God didn't actually ride a cloud? Okay, I grant you that. Maybe God did ride a cloud.
Hey.
And so this language.
But I mean, it seems to me that would be figurative.
So this language is foreign to us, like,
It's foreign to us, correct.
but I get the sense, or I have this little idea that it wouldn't be so foreign to them. They knew
No.
their Bibles.
Exactly.
Like a lot of people knew their Bible. The high priest would have known.
The disciples would have known. And here's why this is important to me. And you guys are like, why is he insisting that this must be preterist? I'm insisting that this must be preterist because I really need Jesus to not be a liar. That. This is the end of his speech. If this is the end of his speech, you're going to have to somehow understand the previous 31 verses as having occurred in this generation. Well, let's take it one at a time. There's one more that I skipped. And he'll send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. In Daniel chapter 7, it starts with the four winds scattering. And what Jesus is doing here is he is gathering. This to me seems like a futurist thing. If I just saw this in isolation, I would say, oh, that's talking about the second coming. If I saw that in isolation, and if you saw it in isolation, you'd probably be like, that's the second coming, it's gotta be. However, it's couched between 30 and 32, and 32 is where he says it's gonna happen in this generation. So the question then becomes, okay, well, and what was he talking about? Again, think about what he's saying in chapters 21, 22, 23, and 24. He's talking about they believed that Israel had the power and authority in the temple and the Pharisees. They were the ones. And what he's saying now is, forget that. I'm going to take my elect from all over the world, not just Israel. I'm going to grab them from Russia, from China, from South Korea, a whole bunch of them from South Korea, from South America, and I am going to create my kingdom out of these people. I'm going to gather them in. That is the preterist interpretation, but in isolation, I will tell you, that does not look like it. To me, that looks futurist. But I have an explanation for that, which I think we'll probably get to next time. But I'll give you a cliffhanger hint. This could be futurist. And I'll tell you why towards the end. Here's one thing that really makes it futurist to me. The loud trumpet call. The loud trumpet call is associated with Jesus' second coming. Right? The other thing associated with Jesus' second coming, the big centerpiece, is a resurrection of the dead. Does Matthew 24 speak of the resurrection of the dead anywhere?
Yeah.
Nope. It sure does not. So it doesn't look like a second coming passage. However, that isolated verse, to me, does look like it. But unfortunately, verse 31 comes right before verse 32. And verse 32, we've read it already. It says, listen, guys, I say to you, and he says you 4 times. I say to you, see all these things. When you see all these things, you know the time is near at the gates. Truly I say to you that this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Now, if you're a futurist, what futurists try to do is they try to say, okay, well, here's what this verse actually means. You guys heard some explanations for what this verse could mean? Anybody heard any explanations for how this could be like not this generation? There are 2 main ones. Well, there are 4, but 2 of them are just so silly I'm not even going to mention them. There are 2 main ones. The one explanation is that the word this generation, the word generation, genea, in Greek, it can mean race, like race of people. So Jesus is saying this race of people will not pass away until all these things have happened, referring to the Jews, presumably. But of course, that is a absolutely meaningless statement. It's like me saying that in 2,000 years there will be Egyptians, and in 2,000 years there will be Persians still. It makes me a prophet. It's like, what does that even mean? It's like, okay, yeah, there'll be Jews in 2,000 years, okay. Not much of a prediction. The other possibility is that this generation is actually referring to, is actually that generation. It's referring to the generation that sees the end. And therefore, it's like saying that the generation that sees the end is the generation that will see the end. It's kind of like a...
It is what it is.
It is what it is kind of statement. But again, this is where we need to be honest and be exegetically sound and use Scripture to interpret Scripture. How does Jesus use the expression this generation? It is unanimous, 100% of the time. When Jesus says this generation, he's talking to the people he's talking to. It's literal. It's what it means. Here are just a few examples in Matthew. And I picked them from Matthew because we're talking about Matthew. The queen of the south will rise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. Because she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom, and now something greater than Solomon is here. Jesus saying, I'm here right now, you guys aren't listening to me, this generation will be condemned. Who's he talking to? Them. Matthew 23, the chapter before, he's talking to the Pharisees. He says, you serpents, you brood of vipers, how are you going to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore, I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify. Truly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. And he's talking about the 7 woes. He's like, y'all are about to get it. And he ends it by saying, this generation will see these things happen. And if you ask me, Josh, why are you a preterist? Because of that. Because I take that word of Jesus seriously. I believe he's telling the truth. I believe he's saying this generation. So here is where we're going to summarize it. You have 3 choices. This is from R.C. Sproul again. Again, I'm not that smart. R.C. Sproul. He says you have 3 options when looking at Matthew 24. You can be a preterist, and in other words, take the time references literally. So when Jesus says things like soon, immediately, and this generation, you take that literally. But if you do that, you then need to take the prophecies of the second coming figuratively. As we did. I explained to you how those things are figurative. Like him coming on the clouds is figurative. The sun darkening is figurative. So the word this generation is literal. The clouds figurative. Or you can do it the other way around. You can take these prophecies of the second coming literally. You can say the sun will actually darken, and God and Jesus will actually come on the clouds. But in that case, you're going to have to take the time references figuratively. This generation doesn't actually mean this generation, and immediately doesn't actually mean immediately, and soon doesn't actually mean soon. So it's one or the other. Because if you want to do both, then your conclusion that Jesus was wrong. Because if Jesus said, in this generation, I will literally come back on the clouds of heaven, well, then Jesus was a false prophet. So those are your 3 choices. He was wrong, or he's speaking figuratively about the time references, or he's speaking figuratively about the second coming part of man. You seem very perturbed. Let me read you what R.C. Sproul says. R.C. Sproul says this. The strength of the preterist position is found precisely in this hermeneutical method. When faced with the option of interpreting the time frame references literally, or interpreting the description of the parousia, or the appearing of Christ, literally, the preterist chooses the former. The preterist choice is governed by a larger hermeneutical principle, namely, the principle of interpreting Scripture by Scripture. Have I mentioned that yet today?
Everyone.
I told you I got this from R.C. Sproul. There is much biblical precedent for interpreting figuratively references to astronomical upheavals and biblical prophecies of catastrophic events. On the other hand, the time frame references are not clothed in such imagery, but are expressed in straightforward, ordinary language. That is why I take that position. Because the Bible itself tells me that I can take this astronomical stuff and come in on clouds figuratively. However, the Bible does not tell me that this generation can be taken figuratively. So by using Scripture to interpret Scripture, I'm going to have to go that way. All right. Before we proceed to the cliffhanger, what are your comments or questions? Pushback. Thoughts?
Well, just clarification on this word preterist. You've taken us through Matthew 24 really nicely, really well, and I'm super appreciative. When you say preterist, like, is that now applying to globally, like all the biblical prophecies and Revelation and everything?
Okay. So preterism, you have to be careful when you Google it. There are 2 brands. There is partial preterism, which is what I'm talking about. And then there is full preterism, which is non-orthodox. Full preterism holds that Christ will not return a second time at all. It's all done. Partial preterism is what I've been expressing in this class, which holds that many of the prophecies that we see as describing a rapture or a second coming actually are simply describing things in the first century. My belief is that the book of Revelation is describing first century. That's my belief. You can disagree on that one. My belief is that Matthew 24 is describing first century. However, partial preterism believes in the Nicene Creed that Christ will come again in glory, establish his kingdom, judge the living and the dead. So even within partial preterism, there is a future hope. It's just not these passages. 2 Thessalonians is describing the second coming of Christ. And a partial preterist will say 2 Thessalonians is describing the future second coming of Christ. However, these passages are much more rare than you would think, is what the preterist position is. A futurist sees all these passages and applies everything to the future. And my contention to you is that the Bible doesn't allow us to do that. Because if you look at the history and let the Bible interpret the Bible, you really got to back off on some of these predictions. And that's the whole point of this class for you guys. I'm hoping to convince you that these kinds of books are not worth buying. And the next guy who tells you, oh, look at AI, this is it, it's the mark of the beast. Don't even open it, don't bother. That's my contention. I could be wrong. I'm going to approach the video and mention this. I could be wrong. For the record. All right, I'm going to leave you with a cliffhanger this morning. There is a fourth option. R.C. Sproul had 3 options. The fourth option comes not from R.C. Sproul. And it's going to get mucky. But I think it's worth looking at. And so next time I'm going to take you guys through this. And for some of you, it's maybe difficult to see. You guys are like, what's he about to do? It's gonna be difficult to see. It's gonna bring more questions than answers, but it's gonna answer the question of what's going on in Matthew 24. But then it's gonna raise a whole bunch of other questions, which could be slippery slope kind of questions. But here is the fourth option. Yeah, that's you guys at the end of the fourth option. Matthew is what is known as one of 3 synoptic gospels. Synoptic is a fancy Greek word which means same point of view. And if you've ever read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you will see that there is an incredible amount of repetition in all 3 of those. They're telling the same story pretty much in the same order, kind of, and using the same verbiage. However, if you look at the Olivet Discourse of Matthew 24, lucky us, or unlucky us, it's also found in Mark 13 and in Luke 21. And if you look at Mark 13 and Luke 21, well, let me take you through a little piece of it. Matthew says, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? We've read that one like 5 times in this class already. But look at Mark. As he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished? Luke, and they asked him, teacher, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? All right. What's the biggest, most obvious difference between these 3 questions?
Coming of the age.
Mm-hmm. Some of you are mumbling it. Remember how in Matthew they asked them 3 questions?
Mm-hmm.
They said, what will be, where are we? When will these things be? Presumably referring to the destruction of the temple. And what will be the sign of your coming? And the end of the age. Look at the other 2.
Doesn't say you're coming.
Doesn't say you're coming. What else does it not say?
End of the age.
Doesn't say the end of age either. In Luke and in Mark, the disciples simply say, so when's it going to happen?
Yeah.
And they're referring clearly to the destruction of the temple. So what I have done is I have gone through all 3 of these passages, and I have highlighted for you, you'll get it next time, the verbiage that they have in common. And it ends up being very, very interesting. What things Mark and Luke omit. You see where I'm going with this? If you study what Mark and Luke omit, and then go look at Matthew, you start getting suspicious of a few things. And I'm going to leave it there as a cliffhanger for you guys. And that is where we're going to end next time. I'm going to show you and talk about the nature of Scripture and what we can expect from Scripture. And it's a slightly dangerous conversation, but I will try to do it fairly. And then secondly, I'm going to end on what you were asking. So what do we know for sure? We're going to end on that. And then we're going to wrap it up in prayer. And hopefully, I'm still a tomato and egg free right now, so it's pretty good.